Hello, everyone. My name is Aaron Christensen, and this is Horror 101 with Dr. AC, a gathering place for fellow fiends the world over to discuss all things freaky and frightening. If you want to be part of the conversation, and I hope you do, I invite you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, maybe go back and check out some of our previous episodes, leave a comment, and most importantly, let us know the fright flicks you'd like to discuss in the future. That kind of connection is exactly what we're looking for, and it really does make a difference. We're all about sharing the scare, and we want to hear from you. From 1942 to 1946, when rust was appearing on the Frankenstein Monster's neck bolts, Dracula was growing longer in the tooth, and swaddled, swollen mummies were limping along both literally and figuratively, a savior appeared on the horror horizon who would provide welcome counter-programming to the usual parade of fur, fangs, and putty. That man was Val Lewton, and his debut production with RKO, 1942's Cat People, heralded a new style of horror where less was infinitely more, where shadows grew ripe with menace lurking just beyond the edge of the frame. Tonight, we'll be discussing Lewton's 1943 follow-ups to Cat People, all three of which are celebrating their 80th anniversary: I Walked with a Zombie, The Leopard Man, and The Seventh Victim. I'm thrilled tonight to discuss the legacy of this amazing producer-auteur, so let me go ahead and bring in my amazing panel, and let's talk to Stan Hyde, ringing in from Canada. S.A. Bradley, all the way from the West Coast. And just down the street from me in Chicago, we have Bobby Zier, host of Lugosi Theater on YouTube. And tonight we're going to be talking about I Walked with a Zombie, The Leopard Man, and The Seventh Victim, all three of which from 1943, and all three celebrating their 80th anniversary this year. Thanks for coming on the show, everybody, and welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, my introduction to Val Lewton was Cat People. That was the first one of his films I saw, but I'd read about him for years and years in reference books, and I didn't see Cat People until much later in my my horror fandom. I was probably in my 30s when I first saw it, but it was one of those that absolutely lived up to its reputation. I was like, wow, this is as good as they say it is, and I feel like it continues to hold up in a way that, you know, some of the other classics do not. And I feel the same about most of these films that we're talking about tonight. I feel like maybe these aren't as strong across the board as Cat People, but all three are just terrific, and they're a great kind of introduction to Val Lewton and his kind of his vision, his kind of overall presentation of horror. Stan, I'd love to kind of jump to you to start us off. If you could talk about, let's talk about I Walked with a Zombie, which was the first follow-up to Cat People. What was your first encounter with I Walked with a Zombie and with Lewton in general?
You know, I'm a famous monster kid, so I remember reading Robert Bloch has an article about fear and stuff where he talks about Lewton, and then Carlos Claren's book. There's, I think, even a still from I Walked with a Zombie.
Yep.
So I think that's the first one I ever saw as a kid. I can't remember if it was Cat People or I Walked with a Zombie, but I Walked with a Zombie is one of my favorites. I mean, it's got a Canadian connection. The mood and the atmosphere and the thing about it is, like, I collect monsters, and the thing about Val Lewton is, what would I collect? A little bit of darkness, a sound effect, maybe a panther, and that's the greatest thing. Like, they completely live in your imagination, and there's this sense with them, including that one. It's scary, dream-like, melancholy kind of quality to them that's almost as powerful as the scary parts.
And Scott, how about you?
I heard about Val Lewton before I saw anything, and I think it was in a reference book. I can't remember which one, but I also think that he was mentioned by Stephen King and Dance Macabre as someone to really take a look at. And I was going, oh, and I was at that point where I was going, I think, I'm tired of everybody telling me that I'm a child because I'm wanting these really good monster movies and everything. How come they can't see horror as respectable? And then I heard about Val Lewton, and people were talking about him at a different level. So I ended up getting the Reality of Terror, Val Lewton. It's Joel Siegel's book from 1973. And it just has this really interesting front cover. For the front page is Bedlam, pictures of the hands coming out from Bedlam. And I'm like, oh, and this sounds really, really cool. And so I started to read about him, and I was going, this guy sounds pretty intriguing. And I saw, I want to say it was I Walk with a Zombie first. And it was probably one of those things where it was on the Channel 9 $1 Million movie. So it was with commercials and all of that stuff. And but I found myself really amazed at, now I can look at it and go, this is all soundstage. But at that time, I was like sitting there going, walking through those reeds, trying to go into this other world seemed so absolutely frightening to me. And I remember going, there's nothing happening here, and yet there's something happening here. And you're just waiting, this weird anticipation all the time. And so also that Lewton walk, right? That's the whole thing, is that he always has this walk. And so you have this walk of doom. And I remember being very scared by that. And in the end, not knowing what the hell happened, sitting there going, was that real? Was that not real? And it stuck with me because of that. At first I'm like kind of indifferent about it. And then I'm like going, why? I don't know. Was that real? Did they drown? Was that what happened?
Right.
And so, yeah, I really enjoyed it. And Lewton became kind of a fascination for me because of reading that book and just hearing his reputation. And it was that one moment where I said, okay, the auteur theory can be something outside of just the director.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I like you, I was a monster kid. And so I'm kind of glad I came to Lewton later in life when I could appreciate him. I don't know that it would have resonated for me as a younger viewer the way it did as a more seasoned horror fan. How about you, Bobby? When did you see I Walked with a Zombie for the first time?
The first time I ever heard of Val Lewton, I was 14, and I was at Barnes and Nobles, and they had the DVD set where they had like all those main horror movies. And I was like, what? There's horror besides Universal Monsters? Like, what's going on here? Because I knew Universal Monsters. I knew like the Monogram things. And there was this other major force. I was looking at the DVD commentaries, and so this guy's got to be pretty good, right? So I did some research on it, and then I said, I got to get this box set. So I watched them like one after the other. I kind of went and I saw Cat People first because I like read that was like the one to start with.
Yep.
And I just kind of watched them in order, and like I was blown away by like the depth that all the characters have, like the mood that the movies have. It's some of them you can't just watch one time. You have to go back to it to get the full like effect of what was going on, get the full atmosphere to really understand and appreciate it.
No, I agree. And I think these are films that absolutely pay off from repeat viewings. Where an analysis and I love having those commentaries to help me kind of, oh, that's what's happening. Okay, great.
Well, it was helpful because that's what I did is I would watch the movie, then I would watch it with the commentary. So it was like there was like a few weeks where it was like all about Val Lewton, where I just like went through the box set through like everything they had.
And I remember when that box set came out, because there was a long time when Lewton was not really celebrated that. He wasn't getting that treatment. And so that box set was a really welcome treat, because suddenly you could be like, okay, everybody, now you don't have an excuse. You can actually watch these movies that I've been talking about.
Yeah. And that was part of his mystique too. I mean, the thing about Val Lewton is there's no like interviews sitting around of Val Lewton. There's no movies, the making of, or anything like that. He was always this guy kind of in the background. There's photos of him, and then there's books about him. But he comes from Selznick, and he spends all that time there. And he's like the great working class hero, but with an artistic edge, because he's working in super low budgets. I think they allowed him total creative freedom as long as he used the title that they came up with. It had to be under 77 minutes, and the budget couldn't ever be more than 150,000. And so you hear those limitations, and you realize that he sat there and said, we're not going to have a rubber monster with a zipper down the back. We're going to do something else, is really kind of impressive. And so I think it's fun that he's now pretty well known. I think a lot of people pretty much know him. But there was a time where, you know, if somebody mentioned Val Lewton, I'm kind of saddling up going, really? Tell me a little bit about this man.
Yeah, there's that documentary from 2007, like Val Lewton, The Man in the Shadows. Lots of mystery. I think the first one I actually saw was The Body Snatcher, because that got me to play.
Yeah.
Like how you were talking about how like before there wasn't like a lot of mention of him. And I think that's why like before I saw that box set, I had never heard of him, because they in the documentary Monster Mania, they don't cover him. Nope. Even in Bride of Monster Mania, they don't go into cat people. So I'm so glad you explained that, because before like I saw that box set, I had like no knowledge of him whatsoever.
One of the first books about horror movies, the Clarence book, features him, you know, but it was like in those days, it's like, what, a book about horror movies? How cool is that?
It felt like striking gold when I discovered Val Lewton.
It really is. It's a remarkable, and it's a whole different view. And I think it opens the door to things like, you know, John Brahms films of like Hangover Square and The Lodger, where you're just appreciating things on it. It becomes a more psychological view of horror, as opposed to the monsters and the overt terror of, you know, like a maniac trying to kill you. That whole thing of the producer auteur.
Yeah.
Like that was something that, you know, as you said, Selznick was somebody who exercised that kind of creative control over his films.
Yeah.
But it wasn't something we really saw in the horror genre. You know, it pretty much was the director is king, you know, and when we identify a certain look, it is because of the director and what they're bringing to it. We think about Todd Browning, we think about James Whale, but to have a producer have that kind of vision, I think was something I hadn't experienced. And it never occurred to me that like they could be as important.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've got three major directors, right? You got Robert Wise, you've got Jacques Tourneur, and Mark Robson, and they're not interchangeable. But if you see stills from any of those movies,
right,
you're going to sit there and go, "It's this guy Lewton is a great guy with he's got a camera eye," and yet it's that idea of, and I think that's one of the things about the auteur theory. People argue splitting like hairs over this thing. It's really, if everybody works with this guy a couple times, if he's using the same actors, if he's using the same cameraman, they're going to have a language. It's just like a band slowly learning each other. Yet at the same point, there's always going to be one person who everybody looks at when things go to shit. And whoever that person is, that's the auteur.
And Lewton exists before like that was auteur theory was really articulated.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you go back to that period in film history, production studio, it's like Marvel today. They had a lot of control over those directors, though they couldn't keep somebody like James Whale from not being like totally individual, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think the same thing with Harryhausen. I mean, you know, he's the one who's got the vision in those films. I think one director got told when he tried to fire him, "No, you don't understand."
That's something too. I mean, these movies lived in a time period with the studio system where the idea of having 150K isn't nearly as bad if you're going to make a movie called Ghost Ship, because they've already built a ship set and you can go in there after hours and essentially make your movie. And they had a look themselves. The MGM had a look, Universal had a look, but there's the RKO Lewton look, which is really he, you know, as we all know, he saves the studio from going down over Magnificent Ambersons, and you know, it's horror once again saves the day.
And that's one of the things that, like, the physical sets in Lewton, I think, just adds to the dreamlike quality of it. It's like it's not real, but that doesn't matter at all.
Yeah, exactly. That actually lends itself to the atmosphere. I remember, you know, kind of a sidebar here, but like watching like Kaidan, you know, the Japanese film from 1964, which is completely set bound, but they're amazing sets and there are these amazing painted backdrops, and it doesn't feel real, but that doesn't feel fake. And I think that's the thing. Like, it feels like you've stepped into this kind of fairy tale where we're going to have a story told to us. And that was something that that atmosphere is what Lewton cultivated.
Film space is not real space anyways. So like lots of times I go, give me a matte painting. I want to see a backdrop. Like that makes me happy. I mean, I love Mexican films because they're so much like the Universal ones because they're doing all
Yes.
stuff on the sets, you know. And it's like Lewton is. The sets are amazing, and it just to me just helps the dream, you know.
It really does, because it's like a world unto itself. You know, the movies. I mean, the cat people and Curse the Cat People do, but pretty much all the movies, they have like their own separate characters.
Right.
But you have that mood goes throughout all of them. Even if the sets are different, they have a certain style. Even like the writing has a certain style where the characters all are really fleshed out, even the background ones. So there's a dreamlike otherworld quality to the Val Lewton movies, and I think that's part of what's so great about them, because it's a separate world that you can go into.
Well, and you see the same actors, pop up from time to time as well. I mean, Tom Conway shows up in two of the three films that we're talking about today, and he featured prominently in Cat People as well.
And he's playing the same character.
I was like, wait a minute, isn't that his character from Cat People? It's like
Inspector
prequel.
Clouseau.
Wait a minute, what's the timeline here?
Yeah, it's like a prequel to Cat People, before he gets eaten. So yeah, let's kind of dive into the meat of I Walked with a Zombie. We have a nurse who is going off to the island of Saint Sebastian, which is they make a point of, it's not Haiti. It's not, where the hotbed of zombies that we've all come to know, from like White Zombie. This was actually based off of a series of nonfiction articles by Inez Wallace. In the credits, it refers to it being, from the story. It's like, well, it's not really a story. It was some articles that she'd written. But it was kind of like laying out the lore of the zombie. And from that, he kind of spins this Jane Eyre, tale of a nurse who's trying to care for the wife of a plantation owner who has slipped into a kind of a trance where she doesn't speak or react, but she does sleepwalk. And along the way, she kind of starts falling for our character of Paul, who's played by Tom Conway. I love the fact that it doesn't feel the same urban quality as Cat People. Obviously, it's set in a kind of a very different environment, but we still have that same kind of lyrical quality to it.
There's this kind of melancholy feeling with all these. I mean, a lot of people have talked about the fact that they were working in World War II, and there was a lot of, acknowledgement of loss around it. Everybody was losing people. But there is this kind of atmosphere to all of them that has this kind of melancholy, this one included, I think, where it's like you kind of can't escape from the bad things, not in a horror movie way so much as a way that's kind of acknowledged, like everybody has to share the guilt almost.
Yeah, everything good dies here, even the stars, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Because you feel like the doom of the story is inescapable when you're on that island. Like, even if you were to get a ship and leave, it would never leave you entirely.
Yeah, and nobody will be happy ever again. I mean, that's the sense you get, is that once you've entered into this, like, there's a kind of a stain that kind of just permeates all the characters, and that melancholy that you're referring to, Stan. And I think that's that sense of loss, that sense of disconnectedness, that sense of loneliness. Like, those are themes that Lewton revisits over and over again. But this idea of Betsy, like, really trying to show her love for Paul by saving his wife,
Right.
and it's just such a wonderful, like it. And he even comments on it. He's like, of course you would think like that, of course that would be the purity that you would bring to this. But she decides she's going to take her the wife Jessica to the voodoo people and see what they can do.
See what the god Carafor at the crossroads can do, right? It's interesting. I like what was being said, because World War II is happening during this, right? We're in 1943. They're shooting probably in 42, and so that's really early. But the bad numbers are already coming in. That's a very destructive war, to say the least. So this is very much horror noir, because we have this idea of the cynicism that's there. I mean, there's very much horror noir, because you have, I think at one point she does this thing about trying to take the wife, and it causes this big stir. And Paul says, there's no easy way to do good, Betty. And that's a very noir line, right?
Yep.
And so you have this thing of where the good is going to get tarnished. Betsy is going to be super pure. She's got to be, scuffed in the ground a little bit by the end of it. And of course, the shadows, when you see the look of the movie, you certainly get that. It's interesting. Saint Sebastian, right, with his arrows in him, the idea of this martyr, also killed for doing good, right? for all these reasons. What's interesting about the movie, though, is that it talks in 1943 in a certain level of frankness, and not so frank, about slavery. So it does, but the original script, it was supposed to be American, and they changed it to Canadian and something else when they finally put it on the screen. But the original screenplay was, they were saying, hey, we had slaves too, and so I don't know if the name of the fictitious island changed or not, but it's interesting how much that's being brought up. That there's loss, there's shame, there's an entire culture being drowned. I mean, Saint Sebastian is a fountain. There's constantly a flood of water coming over this guy, and tears, right? Constant tears. That's what the water fountain is. And yet, it's still 1943, and they can't show the black guy who's the carriage driver take her out of the carriage. It's still a thing of no touch. You can stand there, but no touch. And so it's an interesting thing to see they're progressive talking about this stuff, and yet they're still being held back because of the time period that they're in.
Yeah. Well, but at the same time, as you said, Scott, like we do have a sympathetic portrayal of
Absolutely
a couple of these characters of color, whether it be Alma, the servant, or Sir Lancelot, who's kind of like our Greek chorus character. I love what they do with that Sir Lancelot character. I love the fact that he's singing the song about the plantation family, and then when they find him, or when he realizes that they're here, he goes over and apologizes, and says, I would never have sung that song had I known you were here with a lady. I really like the fact that Lewton does seem to be trying his best to, treat these characters with equal weight. And when Betsy and Alma are talking, they do seem to be speaking as equals. It doesn't seem to be that they are it's master servant. They seem to be operating at the same level, which I really appreciate.
I also love the singing, the guitarist coming in and telling the story. That's so murder ballad, and it also works rather well historically, because if you have the reason that you had balladeers in the first place was that people didn't know how to read. So that was the town crier. At one point in England, they just had the guitarist who was going from town to town saying, "Let me tell you what that dirty king's been doing." And so it was really interesting to see that used as a Greek chorus. And he's shadowed, right? At first he's in the dark and you just see the sea behind him. And I thought, that's really cool.
Well, and you alluded earlier, Scott, to the walk, when they go for that walk and they encounter Carafor, who's our tall, kind of bug-eyed figure, and he's terrifying. And on the one hand, you go, are we othering, the black character there? But I think it's just such a striking image. It's scary, but it's scary on an eerie level, not in a boo scare. And I love the fact that Carafor never really does anything except for stand there and be who he is. There's the one time where he comes back to the village and we don't know what he's going to do. He's like, arms reaching out before Mrs. Rand sends him away. But that walk and getting to the village, I feel like that's kind of the centerpiece of the film.
Everything is done the characters are portrayed like real people. It's very realistic. Even the zombie, it makes sense with like how the voodoo practices would actually be. And I think that's why when you watch it, it has an effect that's so much deeper, because it feels real. It feels like real people.
Yeah. He didn't have a jazz band pretending to play the jungle drums. They actually did do some research to be able to find out what this stuff would look like. And I think you can feel that authenticity in there. And it's still very dreamlike. There's still very much a dreamlike quality to it.
I was going to say that walk into the darkness, which is in all these movies, especially Seventh Victim, I think. Like Roger Corman talks about his movies and how it's, in a psychoanalytic way, it's like walking into this mystery and having things revealed, and that's what it is really in all these movies, but especially I Walked with a Zombie and Seventh Victim. Like, you're going down this dark walk and it's going to open up these mysteries. It's not such a great thing to do because you're not going to get a resolution exactly, but you do understand, when you take that dark walk.
And that's such a great way to describe it, because it's not fantasy like. It's not like how Universal is like a kind of a Never Land. It's specifically dreamlike. It's how the world seems slightly off, just like how if you had a nightmare that took place in your living room wouldn't look the same. It would look off. It would look like a little bit distorted, but you would still like recognize it as your living room. And that's how it feels.
And there's that choice to go deeper. There's the goat, there's Califor, there's and you keep pushing.
They're just walking, right? But you put enough anticipation in there and you keep building it up. I love the little poetry. The thing about Lewton is that he took a lot of his ideas from paintings and photographs. And so there's this wonderful moment when the curtain in the wind blows up against the harp and it plays a trill. And I was just like going, oh man, that just giving that beat, that one moment to something that once again builds up that fantasy. It's like there's magic here. Is it good magic or not good magic? Well, we're going to have to find out by the end of the last reel.
Well, and the irony is that, like this is a 68-minute movie. So you would think it's got to be like boom, boom, boom. Like, let's get all of this done. But it doesn't. It takes its time, but it never feels like we're padding it out. It feels like it feels like a brush stroke where it's like, this is just going to accentuate what we're telling. That's the story that we're telling. Following up, I Walked with a Zombie, which was a title that was given to him by RKO. And he was given another one called The Leopard Man, which, sounds a little like something from Universal. But then he goes and does his cat people magic again and tells us a story that is not at all. It's not cat people and certainly not Wolfman. It's something completely different.
This is the one that Robert Bloch talked about in that article in Famous Monsters of Filmland, the scene with where the girl is sent out.
Oh my gosh.
Specifically because you get to imagine it. You don't get to see it, which is like the problem with CGI. Like, filmmakers sometimes forget it's unnecessary. You have to tell us a story. You don't have to show us everything that happens.
Yeah. I think that might be my favorite walk of all the Lewton walks, because it's 2 walks. You got to go there and then you got to go back. So you make it through that tunnel the first time, then you got to go back through it again. And there's just a lot of really cool beats that are in that sequence.
Yeah. And it opens, that opens the film. Like, that scene kind of hangs over the rest of the movie the entire time. It's such a strong sequence, but also, the fallout from it, the guilt that all the characters feel. All the characters feel the guilt of that, the leopard killing the girl, like the showgirl and her agent. And the only one who doesn't feel any guilt is Clo-Clo, because she feels no guilt about anything. It one-ups the bus by having the train go by. And I thought that was just a great kind of like level up for Lewton.
And it has that throwing the story to different characters. I remember there's a commentary by Friedkin on it, and he talks about the fact he thinks it was influential to
Tarantino.
I've marked too many student essays about Tarantino. The name has been banished from my head. But Friedkin talks about how, well, style wise, that he thinks it influenced him because of the way the picture gets handed off to somebody else. That walk happens repeatedly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. There's like a curse that's there. Like Clo-Clo gets the curse during that card thing, and then she's the last person to see the little girl. She goes by and waves at the door, and then she gets sent. And then later on, the girl who's staying for her boyfriend in the cemetery. So there is almost like this thing of the curse is contagious, and she's the carrier in some ways, Clo-Clo. And yeah, I like that. I don't see the Kill Bill thing, but I get that.
I'm not sure that I do. It reminds me more of like Dario Argento in Inferno or something like that, where he keeps throwing the story to somebody else, or maybe Hitchcock, in terms of our scene too. But the fact that we follow somebody and then we, it turns out, well, that's not really the person to follow. But it never kind of settles in this one. It just keeps going, from person to person.
We're introduced to, our main showgirl who's going to bring the leopard on stage, and her agent, and we think, okay, those are going to be our two leads, and then, like you said, we end up following a whole bunch of different characters, and then it kind of circles back to those two because they're the only ones left. It's like, well, we've murdered everybody else in the town, so it has to be those have to be our main characters again.
I was so impressed when I first saw that, and I was so surprised that at that time I was mainly just like watching the Universal monster movies. So the idea that like a horror story from that era, they would take such an unconventional storytelling technique. I was so impressed by that.
Like The Ring and The Grudge too, in terms of sending what you said about the curse, about the curse going on, and that's the thing that we're following as much as we're following the characters.
Yeah, there's a lot of really cool things that you see in progression of these movies as well. I mean, the first film, he talks about racism and slavery. And this one, we're talking about poverty, so it's said often, poor don't cheat one another, we're poor together, that whole idea. And this one is where it feels not so much as like a dream, but it does feel a little bit fairy tale-ish because this is New Mexico in 43, right? And yet it feels like, go get the cornmeal for your father who's coming home. If you love me, let me in. All of those things feel so much like a
black robes at the end.
Oh, the procession,
yeah. It's like, oh my God, like where did they come from?
Yeah, there's this real feel of like a fairy tale that's going on in how this is, and then you bring this modernity to it, where wait, it's not a panther. The leopard is running around, but then there's actually this killer. And that kind of caught me off guard the first time I saw it, because I thought it was going to be something supernatural, and it was not. And the way that it's done is kind of interesting. So much sound. Again, Lewton and sound. Sound must be really cheap. Needle drops must be really cheap.
With Wells coming from, the Mercury Theater of the Air and everything, they've sort of got that history of sound work being a big deal.
One of the things I thought was interesting is that, when it turns out to not be the leopard, that feels like a pretty big leap on the part of our main characters. It's like, well, wait, why wouldn't it be a leopard? They go off of the fact that, they say, well, it wouldn't have been scared by anything. But it's like, like any other movie, be like, well, there's a wild leopard on the loose. Of course it's killing everybody.
It's really pretty proto-giallo reasoning,
Actually, I'm so glad you just said that, because like when you think of how straightforward like the Frankenstein films are, how the villagers figured out it's the monster, let's all go get him. Whereas like the leopard, it's maybe that doesn't make sense,
right?
Maybe it's somebody else, and it does turn out to be like to be a person. I just like the whole different approach to the story and how they're thinking on like deeper levels of how this would actually play out.
Yeah. Well, and the idea that, like Charlie Howcome, the guy who owns the leopard in the first place, like he says he drinks and then he blacks out. And like, he's like, well, I can't rule myself out as a suspect, so you have to lock me up. Going back to what you were saying, Scott, the idea of addressing, different races, like, yes, we're here dealing with Mexicans, and Charlie Howcome seems like he might be of some Asian descent or something. It's not like, the Mexicans are good or bad. You know, like Clo clearly, you know, feels above this. She doesn't feel like she belongs to this community. She feels like she's above it, and she desperately wants to get out. And we get the sense, I mean, when we meet our white characters, they're jerks, you know, like they come off as like, you know, these hard-boiled jerks. And yes, they, you know, they rib each other later about being soft, you know, but they're trying to put on this, like they don't want to take responsibility for their part in this. And it's like, they're absolutely culpable. Like the fact that like our agent guy gets to walk away. It's like, wait a minute, didn't you bring the leopard into the nightclub in the first place? Like, how are you not responsible? I do want to talk about that scene, that the scene of Teresa Delgado at the door, because I feel like that is one of those amazing sequences, and the genuine fear that comes from that voice behind the door. It is palpable. Like it's it's a great performance, and it's only a matter of lines, but I absolutely believe in the terror that's happening, and the way they play it, where something slams against the wall or the door and you see it from the inside, and then you see them just scrambling to open the door, and then the blood coming underneath.
Yeah. Again, that idea, sense of loss, that very noirish thing, the idea that we're once again in the middle of the war. There's this cynicism. You got to be hard. You know, everybody's going to be tough. No one, I'm not a softie for any of this stuff. We're at war. And yet that idea that doesn't really work, you know, in a way they need to be soft to be able to make it through this. The harshness is not working. And again, it comes down to this weird thing of economics. Economics is kind of pushing a lot of what's going on in this story.
And that's what I think what makes that scene like even like scarier is all the characters feel so real. It feels like a real, I mean, like the dynamic of the mom saying, no, you got to go get the cornmeal. Like that's something that it's a real mother-daughter dynamic, you know, like, and then your mother not believing when you're telling them there's a leopard out there. Like, so and then the guilt that she feels, like the terror that she feels when it's really happened. Characters convey so much in such a short amount of time. And I think it makes that scene even like scarier because it just feels so real. And then when you see that blood coming out from under the door, it's terrifying.
Yeah.
Well, Clo is really someone that you would think would be a write-off character. That's a side character, right? That's actually the character with the best arc. It's the character that has the most dimensions. She's a gold digger, but not a gold digger. She's the singer. She's sagely. She needs to get out of there. She supports people who normally wouldn't be supported. There's all this interesting stuff about her, and there's a cynical edge to her. Poverty does that to you, right? And so that you get this idea, she's the voice of that town in New Mexico, a sleepy little town in New Mexico. And I think that's really cool. Like when they're leaving, they're heading to the next city, and one of the people who's in the dressing room is like, "Oh, what I wouldn't do to leave." You know, there's that big sigh of like, "Where are you going, Chicago?" Oh my God. You know?
Clo is led to her death by money too. You know, and there's that moment where she thinks she sees it and she picks it up and discards it because it's clearly not. And then she's still looking, and that's when she finally gets hit. So this whole idea of poverty and wealth and, you know, wanting to be anywhere else and find a means to do it.
She would not have gone back out if not for the need. I do like the fact that she is constantly practicing with her castanets. You know, like that's why she's so good at it. So there you go, kids. You know, keep up with your lessons. You'll be really, really good. Let us move forward into the seventh victim, which was his least successful of these three films in terms of both critical and commercial success. It was a film that I had kind of overlooked as well. And Lee Price wrote an essay for the book I edited called Hidden Horror. And I do recommend, if you have a copy of Hidden Horror, to flip open to that essay, because it's an extraordinary write-up that it really helped me appreciate the film even more. But he talks about it being an examination of loneliness. and isolation, and that's something in that urban environment. He refers to Lee Price refers to the Edward Hopper painting Nighthawks, and how it's easy to imagine that, you know, one of those characters is a poet and one of them is, you know, a failed entrepreneur, and, you know, like that all of these characters are going to go home and, you know, like one of them's going to hang themselves, and it's like, oh wow, okay, hadn't thought of it in that regard. So I mean, it's a great essay, but also it helped me feel a lot more appreciation for the film, I think, because it's less supernatural than anything we've come to see up to this point. There's less kind of drama to it. It's more of just kind of a mystery of like, where has her sister gone, and, you know, what has she gotten mixed up in. And then, you know, like the horror part of it is, well, they're devil worshippers, so, you know, there's that.
Yeah, I it's interesting. All three of the movies, I have someone mentions being afraid of the dark, and so it's interesting that that when you work with shadows as much as they do in these movies, at this one, the streets are almost pitch black. There are times in that movie where you're like going, where the hell are they? You have a disorienting feel. It's supposed to be Manhattan, I believe, right? Greenwich Village.
Yeah.
And I'm going, you know, man, it's a city of lights. And yet this is like the darkest I've ever seen New York at all. The thing that I think is interesting is looking at the idea of loneliness and the cynicism of not wanting to go on. I think one of the characters says you have to have courage to live in this world.
Yeah.
And so there's that whole thing of people just kind of holding on. You know, it's 43, once again, not to bang that drum too often, but there's definitely the brewing of noir, and there's a reason that noir takes off like it does. There's just the idea that we have essentially Ira Levin and Polanski's Satanists, you know, people who just look normal and average, and but it's the idea of, once again, something that used to be very strong, maybe not so strong anymore. We have cynicism about it. One person shouts the Lord's Prayer because these people love chaos or death or the devil or whatever they end up calling it. So there's like this. Must have been really doomsaying in 1943 to watch that movie and see people who are not in the church at all, and they're not like craven and sickly. They're like doing well. You know, they're doing well, no longer dealing with God in any way and going on the dark side. So there's a lot of stuff in there that feels like, what's the point? You know, what's the point of going on? And I think that's really intriguing, that it's about loneliness. And I mean, we don't see our main character, our seventh victim. We hear about her constantly. It's like that old Chekhov thing. You know, she's in every scene because they talk about her, but we don't see her until the door opens, and all she does is go shh, and closes the door again.
And then disappears.
You're infuriated, but there is that thing of how disconnected everybody is in that movie. Our main character, the woman who was at the boarding school, she's really doesn't belong there. She doesn't belong anywhere. You know, she's already 6 months defunct on payment. So if they can't find this sister quick, she's in serious trouble. Everybody seems to be just floating in this movie. And I love the set piece. I mean, the thing I will say about this movie, and I may be in the minority, is whenever it's daylight, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Once it gets dark, once there are shadows, the movie sings. The stuff on the subway, the stuff on the streets, all that inside of the office, the morgue, not the morgue, where the private eye goes. There's that room, the perfume place. Weird, a perfume place. But you know, going in there, all of that is like you can taste the atmosphere. And then when it's daylight, it's like, okay, let's accept it.
It's so dark. This was one, like, I never saw this. When was that box set? 2007 or so? I'd never seen it until I got the box set. And I have to be honest, the first time I saw it, I kind of ignored it. Sort of like, yeah. And then, but then the ending, the walk down the hallway when the guy gets so dark, and everybody and everything in it is dark, and it just goes to a dark place. It's kind of amazing.
The scene when they want Jacqueline to drink the poison, the apartment is so dark. And Jacqueline herself, she's so dark, like she looks so dark and so remote.
Right.
Even when she's talking, there's something about her tone of voice that feels so disconnected to the other characters she's talking to.
Oh yeah, she's got that golem haircut. It's
yeah.
It's just this weird darkness to her. Oh my gosh, what was I going to say about that? That whole thing of walking down the hallway where our private eye is stabbed, and we know because we've seen movies a million times. We have an idea. There's not one stinger bit of music in these films.
Right.
You only have music when it's necessary. So you're left with the sound of a guy dragging across the floor, her speaking, the sounds that are there, the incidentals. And it's so good because that feels so real. There's no exclamation points. You're leaning in. What does this mean? What are we looking at? And I thought that was so great.
One thing with all of these movies, but especially I noticed with this one, is that these little bit parts makes such an impression. I mean, yes, the detective has a larger part, and I think he's delightful. But like the librarian, who is looking through the cards that the people have checked out, looking at what books they've checked out. Like, she is just such a hoot. I love the woman who used to work for Jacqueline. The one who doesn't want her to drink the poison at the end. Like, just all these little parts that make such a huge impression. And then we have our main characters like Mary, like the character that Hugh Beaumont plays, Ward, which I think is hilarious, because he's going to go on and play Ward Cleaver, and then of course Tom Conway back as Dr. Lewis Judd. Like, everybody is so good in this movie. Like, I just think the performances in this one are incredible. What you just talked about, the idea of Jacqueline, her kind of disconnectedness. She has that great line. It's one of the first things we hear her say is that life isn't worth living unless you can end it. That seems to be her creed. And that's why the noose is constantly hanging in her room. Jacqueline lives next door to a woman who is dying of consumption and never goes out. Poetry of that final scene, when Jacqueline comes home and has the interaction with her neighbor, and you get the sense that they've never probably ever met before. One of them has decided they're dying and they're going to embrace life. And one of them has just escaped death, but they're not going to be looking over their shoulder the rest of their life.
Yeah, that was an interesting sequence because that movie was sold to me on that shot. It was in a documentary somewhere, and I'm not necessarily sure the person remembered the seventh victim very well from that, because they were saying one character is ready to die and is going to live a certain way, and the other one is just constantly trying to commit suicide and may already be dead. And I'm like, I've got to see this movie. What are you talking about? And I thought there was going to be like this big long scene in there, and instead it's this interesting coda towards the end of the movie. And it's he calleth all his children by their name is the words that are written above the morgue doors. I mean, how freaking crazy is that?
the chair and the noose. You can't really go darker than this.
Yeah, and you can't forget that it's there. You never have to go in that room again. You just show that door, number 7, right? And the interesting thing is, though, how everybody reacts to that. Like, I might take the noose down. I saw that. But like, everybody's just like, oh yeah, I guess that's noose room. We're just going to keep that noose room.
Actually, when you say that, it's like, absolutely, I would take the noose down. I would move the chair and take the noose down, in real life.
Yeah, take the wrath of the person. But how often are they there? It's such a creepy idea to think that she rents that place just to kill herself. And she changes the locks. So A, no one can get in to help her, but B, she's just going to lay there until someone finally breaks down that door. That's isolation.
I don't think there's anything darker than this movie in some way.
And you don't see it.
You just know what
happened. Hear it
because of what you hear.
And there's no major that's such a cynical Norrish end. That's like an Altman end where you sit there and you have this thing where the person who's going down the stairs doesn't realize what's happened.
Right.
They're indifferent to it. It's like, oh, somebody must have dropped something. We know a life just ended,
Right.
and no one else knows. And that's like, holy shit.
Yeah, Bobby?
Oh, I wanted to say about you, Beaumont, because even though this was done before Leave It to Beaver,
Oh, for sure.
I definitely saw him in Leave It to Beaver first, and so the scene of him explaining the news and Jacqueline's idea that life is only worth living if you can end it. It was so, to me, that made it feel even darker, because like that actor, I'm used to seeing him say, wisdoms, something you could trust. So so there's something about Hugh Beaumont's voice that when he says it, you believe it, and you're believing this like really dark idea because of his delivery. So it even adds to the darkness. I think that such an actor we generally see in such a wholesome light, is he saying this as well?
Well, what's interesting is I just now I'm thinking about this, but like this and I Walk with a Zombie, we have, a husband who is married to a woman, but they don't really belong. This is not a healthy relationship any longer. And somebody else comes in to the equation who loves them, but they understand that you're married and therefore we can't, it's a love that cannot speak its name. There is that scene of her at the table with the poison in front of her. I mean, I just found that it doesn't feel like it should work. And I wonder for a younger modern audience if they would be able to buy into it. But I was like going, I don't know why this works as well as it does, because no one is forcing her.
Right.
No one is restraining her. They're just saying, you have to drink. You have to do it. You said you would. So now you have to.
And that worked 6 times before.
And what's stuff is her reaction is like so calm. Like when she's saying, "I'm thirsty. Give me some water." Like
Right.
she's not terrified. She's not going to drink the stuff, but she's so calm about it.
I think this weird lassie appeared in my head. I'll try to explain this. I think it's because you care so much that she doesn't. It's like those moments in a Lassie movie where the dog's lost and it walks down the street and the people are on the other street and you want them to come together. And in this case, you don't want her to drink the poison, but it's a contract between you and her, not so much like suspense as caring about whether she's going to do it or not, because it's not, there's every possibility that that's how she feels, and we already know about the news.
Oh yeah, it's weird principles. That's the thing that I thought was really interesting. This movie really complicates the hell out of stuff. It's a pretty simple idea, but then we have devil worshippers who are against violence except for this one place, and it's death.
Yeah.
But they're not going to make you do it. They're going to sit there and wait for you to finally decide. That's so complicated.
Yeah.
And yet it's talking to the idea of your inner resolve, right? She's ready to commit suicide with the noose and on her own schedule. No one is going to tell her to do it. And that's the conflict that's happening when she's there. Drink it. No. And I love that she says that she's thirsty and she's tired. So there is this whole thing of, I'm not doing anything, but at the same point, we're not going to give you water. We're not going to let you leave the room. You can't get out of that chair until you kill yourself, but we're not doing it. And that has a very cynical feel about, where, there's that idea of all of the noirs out there being this great distrust that we've gone down a dark path that we cannot come back from. When getting into the war, whatever the government's doing, whatever industry's doing, a cynicism takes over at that point. And you can feel that here, that this is like this weird thing, but we're not telling you to do nothing. At the same time, you're not leaving here until then. We're going to kill you with kindness. And that's such a strange thing to have in this movie. And yet it's like one of the levels of strangeness that's there.
There's two scenes I wanted to kind of point out that were just ones that really struck me this time around. One of them is the shadow on the shower curtain.
Oh,
I'm like, how can we not think of Alfred Hitchcock there? And that scene goes on and on and on. And you're like, I'm having this conversation with the shadow. I'm naked. I'm in here in the taking a shower. And this woman is basically telling me, you should probably go. You probably shouldn't be here anymore. So I love that scene, but also the scene on the subway car where the two guys bring the detective and you don't know it's the detective. And then it's eventually revealed and you're just like, oh, this is more sinister than we'd considered, you know, that they're willing to drag a guy onto a subway car and dispose of him. Like those two moments just like rang out to me this time around.
Oh yeah, that subway scene. The thing that gets me with it is the reverse shot when she's trying to leave the car and she looks back and they're both looking at her and kind of pointing at her. And that was so much like Rosemary's Baby. It was so much like I'm trying to think of Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut, or the scene in The Shining where he looks in the door and there's that weird thing with the bear mask guy, and you know, just this weird thing where it doesn't quite feel real. They shouldn't be looking. And that weird fourth wall kind of breaking thing within the scene hits you as off balance and surreal. And I thought that was so friggin' cool.
And there's this weird faith in the religion thing too, where part of her dying is she knows she's broken the rules. There's a very weird kind of like anti-faith thing going on, you know, with her, and it's really powerful too.
You said you would, so you have to.
Okay, so I would like to know what multiverse this is in, because he talks about knowing this crazy woman.
Right.
It's got to be Irina, but she killed him.
Yeah, so he's dead.
So it's like maybe Dr. Judd is the ghost that's haunting this movie. It's really one of the, because the first time he was there, I thought, wait a minute. He just said Judd. He's the same character. And it's like, yes, it's clearly was intentional.
Or he only has crazy women as his patients.
Yeah, that's
just as a series of them.
That's Dr. Judd.
I have an opening. Who's insane?
Once again, the emphasis on women in all these,
yes,
you know, amazing in terms of, you know, and dealing with
the time,
loss and guilt and all the things that, you know, would have been significant at that time, you know, the war. But I going back to what you're saying about the film noir as well, it is like, you know, there's this road that you go down and it's the wrong one, and it leads, it's like detour or something, you know. You're all of a sudden your life is destroyed because you took the wrong path. Not really the femme fatales at all, because all the women are kind of more developed as caring mostly, you know.
For sure. They're sympathetic characters.
Yeah, he grew up in a house mostly of women, correct?
They're not serving coffee like in the science fiction movies they love.
That's right.
Get out of my way. There's just something in the way. Get out of my way.
Don't understand is, you know, and the guy will mansplain and she'll just nod and then serve him coffee. Yeah.
Well, what's remarkable is that, again, all three of these movies came out the same year. Like this, I mean, you just think about like the body of work over the course of 12 months, you know, and Cat People having just happened, you know, a few months earlier.
And there are two more.
Right.
Yeah, that are coming down the way. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, like he's got a Body Snatcher, he's got Bedlam, he's got, you know, like they're just right around the corner. Isle of the Dead. You know, like it's an amazing movie. Amazing collection of films that he's responsible for.
We're so lucky he existed and didn't just do what the studio wanted him to do, because then we'd have 5 really lame Universal movies, you know. And we got, you know, or
underfunded monogram movies.
The guy turns into a leopard, and you know,
Well, that's when all the great stuff happens, right? When somebody is teetering, they don't know what they're supposed to do next. You know, the studio RKO is about to go under. Magnificent Ambersons is the toilet swirling, and they're ready. You know, okay, well, he's just part of the horror unit, I think they called it.
Right.
So you're over here, you know, next to
the newly formed horror unit.
Yeah, we'll put it over there to try and steal from Universal. And you're willing to take chances, right? So they're just like, please, just do something. We got $150,000, do something. And they do it, and it works. Like, they hated him. Like, they gave him Cat People, and they saw what Cat People was, and it goes, no, we wanted people in cat costumes running around attacking people. And then they go, oh, it's a hit. do more of that thing we can't stand.
Here's I walked with a zombie. Go.
Yeah, right.
And it just has like, it's terrifying on such like on such a deeper level. Like,
Yeah.
going back to the shower scene, you said the tone of voice that the actress has. I forgot what her name was, but the one, the shadow.
Miss Reddy. Yeah.
Miss Reddy. It feels like a voice, you know. Even it's a very familiar voice. She seems like a person, like a real person that you've met in your life, and just knowing what's behind her, this whole group behind her, and when she's saying that you should go back to school in a very normal way, and that's what's terrifying, is knowing the truth behind it.
Well, that's the level of paranoia. I mean, in the beginning of the movie, she's told she can come back to that school. And then the person who came back says, don't come back. Whatever you do, don't come back.
Right.
You know, you have to have courage to be out there. And then she's out there and someone else says that. But you get the idea that everybody she meets is part of some cabal. You know, so that's what's really creepy. She's a perfume person, right? She bought yeah.
And the friend who works in the perfume, she's in on it too. It's like everybody's in on it, you know. It reminds me of Rosemary's Baby.
Yeah,
it does. It really does, because Ruth Gordon just seems like the friendliest, like, you know, little old lady. You know, and it's the same here. It's everyone. You know, the characters, they seem real. They seem like people that you know, and there's this whole other side to them. And I think that's what's so terrifying about it.
Yeah.
And also the era when it was made, because, like, you know, we think of Rosemary's Baby, there is this interest in the occult and sort of, but, you know, we're talking now 1943, you know, finding some pretty interesting stuff, including like the origin of the devil cult and everything like that. The other, you'd have like Burn Witch Burn, Conjure Wife was adapted, but, you know,
I was thinking like Black Cat, the Karloff Lugosi one,
right?
34, and that's like the first time I think I thought I've heard about Satanists and like, what? Wait, what's all this? Hang on a second.
Yeah, and the way they do it in the Inner Sanctum one is not very good. I mean, his book is great, and
like the Satanist cult and the Seventh Victim, it feels so real. It feels like how this would really work.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I love about it. It's also what I love about Rosemary's Baby, is that it's not talking about the dastardly people trying to do something. It's the regular Joe that just right next to you. It's like a parlor art. You know, it's like the Elks Club, but there's Ghost Club.
It's like, who brought the Triscuits? Because, you know, we gotta have our monthly meeting here.
It is.
You know, Polanski's kind of bringing that with his Satanist cult. It's not the Nazis, it's the co-conspirators, the people who are on the side, that last generation. And in this, it's like, who knows what the hell is actually going on. It's just the world's coming apart, and the people who are doing okay are these Satanists. You know, they seem to be handling things quite well, and if it's not working, they know how to get their membership down.
That's chaos, and go for it.
I thank you all. This has been what a great conversation. You don't get the opportunity to talk about Lewton as often, and I know we it's one of those things where you kind of like grasping at how to articulate, you know, what it is that because it is kind of ethereal what he does. You know, it feels a bit like a magic trick. So thank you for helping me, you know, try and wrestle this to the ground.
Yeah, you can't even ask him, right? I mean, the quote they all give is, well, you just turn off all the lights and then the audience will think for you. It's like,
I think some of the best stuff is it goes beyond what should work, you know, and even the creator can't really explain what the heck is going on exactly, you know, and that's some of the best stuff.
When you watch a Val Lewton movie, it's the movie and the audience working together.
Yeah, there's definitely a contract and a trust that Lewton had with his audience that we'd be able to go for the ride, and a ride he definitely gives us. Looking forward to have you all back again very soon. Until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.